It has been argued over the years that there is truly no more powerful agency in the United States than the CIA. More powerful than the president, more powerful than the Congress, even some would argue more powerful than the Supreme Court. That is why there is real concern tonight over a push by the CIA to try and go after anybody who criticizes them. It's understandable, right? It's actually the agency, that is pushing Congress to try and pass a bill that could make it easier to prosecute whistleblowers and journalists who are doing their jobs, right? It would amend the Intelligence Identities Protection Act, a law from the 1980s, to ostensibly protect more covert agents than ever before. Michele Greenstein's been working on this for us. She's going to break it down. And first, you can maybe explain to us what this law is. What's it called? The Intelligence Identities Protection Act?
That's exactly what it's called. And right now it makes it a federal crime to expose or identify any undercover agents of the U.S. So currently this law only applies to agents who are acting abroad, who are living and acting abroad, so not on U.S. soil. But now Congress is actually adding language that would expand who's protected by what's called covert agents, right? So this is actually language that the CIA requested directly. The CIA is essentially invoking WikiLeaks to say that this covert agents definition, which is the original definition of the law, is too narrow and that we need to expand it to everyone, including agents on U.S. soil.
And let me just say, for anyone who's wondering the same thing, if it's about an agent's life being in danger if you share information about them, I'm all for that. I think these people are putting their life on the line, and we should protect them if it's a blatant attempt for publicity or simply to out them for the sake of outing them.
That's right. And in fact, the CIA argues that this law is about protecting CIA officers.
Good.
However, it's only been used twice, and which is why a lot of critics are saying that it's not actually about protecting CIA officers, but what it's actually going to do is effectively make it so that potential whistleblowers, whether they're journalists or just citizens or even people who are agents themselves blowing the whistle on a waste, fraud, or abuse, become more vulnerable to prosecution under this law, effectively muzzling reporting on torture, surveillance, or any other crimes that the U.S. government may be committing. So the CIA may argue that it's about CIA officers, but Petraeus, the CIA director who exposed the names of 10 covert officers, was not prosecuted under this law. He was not charged under this law. Leon Panetta, another CIA director who actually outed the SEAL Team 6 CIA officer who killed Osama bin Laden, was not charged. And this law also wasn't used by the DOJ to charge the people who exposed Valerie Plame as an undercover CIA officer, essentially as retribution for her husband blowing the whistle on the justification for the war on Iraq.
So that's called selective enforcement.
That's right. And some people are calling it a law that only gets used for political purposes. So they're saying it's not about protecting CIA officers, and there's no reason to make this law stronger when it's already not about protecting CIA officers. So one of the two times that this law was ever used was against John Kiriakou, who blew the whistle on the CIA's torture program. And he's also of the opinion that this is going to be used for political purposes and that we should not make this law stronger. So let's take a listen to what he had to say.
Okay.
The real reason the CIA wants to protect these identities is to make it illegal to out someone who has been involved in war crimes or crimes against humanity. Not only is an updated law not necessary, but an updated law would be far worse for people like journalists or human rights activists that are just trying to get organizations like the CIA to abide by the law.
So this is a guy who, in 2013, the DOJ prosecuted just for confirming the name of a CIA officer who was involved in the CIA torture program to a reporter. No one else was told that name, just the reporter. And even though this law was used to prosecute him, and the law says that this person must be engaged in a pattern of activity that would hurt intelligence activities of the U.S., and he was not involved in a pattern of activity, this law was essentially abused in the case of John Kiriakou, and still deployed against him just because he had a record of being against waterboarding.
And he went to prison for saying something which was in his conscience. He said, this isn't right, and I'm going to do something about it.
He blew the whistle, exactly. And just as a side note, since you're bringing it up, ironically, Gina Haspel, who was actually involved in the destruction of torture tapes at the CIA, who was a covert agent when the news of this scandal erupted, actually rose through the ranks to become director of the CIA. So it's an interesting thing that says about the system in which we live. But John Kiriakou's case, he says, sets a terrible precedent. So let's listen to how he explained that.
Okay.
One of the first things that my attorneys raised in my own case was that I had to have had criminal intent to out a CIA officer. Of course, I did not have any criminal intent to out a CIA officer. And indeed, the officer that I was accused of outing, his name was never made public. Never. Nobody knows the name. But the judge made a ruling that set a very dangerous precedent. She would not recognize the legal notion that the defendant had to have criminal intent. And my attorneys actually objected and asked, Your Honor, are you saying that a person can accidentally commit espionage? And she said, that is exactly what I'm saying.
Accidentally commit espionage. So what changes is that under the new law, regardless of whether or not this officer is on U.S. soil or not, you can be prosecuted for outing anyone who is involved in, for example, torture. Okay, just even if you're a journalist or even a whistleblower. So one of the groups that's against this new provision is called Open the Government. And here's what one policy analyst from Open the Government had to say. They say that the CIA's proposal seriously expands the felony criminal penalties that could be used against journalists, against whistleblowers, and against public interest organizations. It opens the door to a ton of abuses and secrecy to a much greater extent. And other groups that have come out against this new provision include the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers, Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press, the Society of Professional Journalists, and a number of others. And they've all put out this statement that say that this new provision will have a, quote, chilling effect on journalists and public interest organizations.
Chilling effect, of course, for those of you who don't know, is a word used by the Supreme Court when they explain, libel law. What it essentially means is that a journalist will fail to do his job for fear that he's going to be prosecuted for doing his job.
I mean, what could be more chilling than making it a crime just to publish information, regardless of where you got that information from?
And especially if you deem the information to be in the public good.
Right.
Because I understand if you're just showboating or trying to hurt someone, then maybe you should be prosecuted. I
mean, what do whistleblowers do? They expose waste, fraud, and abuse. They're our last line of defense in a system that's divorced from what's fair, ethical, or humane. So if we're criminalizing blowing the whistle, we may be heading down a slippery slope.
This is a very important conversation, one Americans should have. Thank you for